Well, here we are in Kaiser, Oregon, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jim Calvert.
Hi.
And thank you, Jim, for driving from Klamath Falls over the mountain there. Uh, and Jim was our company supply sergeant, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But first, Jim, I just want to ask a couple of basic questions, like where were you born and raised?
I was born in New London, Connecticut. My father was a naval officer. He was a submarine officer. So there was a big sub base there. And that's where I was born.
And what was childhood like for you? Did your dad move around a lot?
Oh, yeah, we always moved
So you were
every year or two.
you were kind of a
Military brat. Yeah, we moved every year or two. He was career
Okay.
military.
And what is your date of birth?
On November 10th, 1945.
Okay. And when you were you in college or after high school, or what did your life look like when you were Vietnam when you were about
Oh,
the age
well, I was in college. I went to Harvard College. I was at Harvard. I was a senior. I was a conscientious objector. I got a conscientious objector status. Wasn't going to go. And because of my father being at that time a three-star admiral, he didn't like that idea too much of my not going. He was the superintendent of the Naval Academy, and which is a very important job in the Navy. And he sort of came up to Cambridge, where I was living, and argued with me for a few days. And eventually, I said, "Okay, I'll just go." So I
Did-
called the draft board and told them I would go.
Did it have anything to do with Jim? I'm going to cut you off.
Oh no,
No, I'm just
no,
I'm just
oh no,
I'm just kidding.
no! I didn't care about anything like that.
Now, I know this because you've told me before, but
Yeah.
for people that are watching this, your dad had a unique notoriety when he did something with a submarine under the polar.
Oh yeah, he was a very interesting naval officer. He was during World War II. He was a torpedo officer in a submarine called the Jack. They sunk 29 merchant ships and one destroyer. He was very heavily decorated. He got a bunch of silver stars and everything because that was very scary. Half those guys were killed,
Yes.
and easily half. I think maybe more than half. And he wrote a book actually when he was about 80 about his World War II experiences
Yeah.
called Silent Running.
I was just going to ask you.
Yeah.
And so, Silent Running.
Yeah, that's the name of his book.
Okay.
And his name is the same as mine, James Calvert.
Okay.
So, but anyway, at the time, he was had just been assigned to be the superintendent of the Naval Academy when I was getting ready to not go to Vietnam. And
And that brings me back to the question. It sounds like you volunteered, so you weren't drafted.
oh, I was drafted. I called the draft board and told them they could draft me.
Oh, so a voluntary draft.
Yeah,
Okay.
I called them. I told
okay.
them never mind about the conscientious objector.
Okay.
But I was working at that time on a job in Hollywood that I didn't want to stop right then. So I asked them if they could just let me go till December. And they said, okay, if you'll come in December, we'll call you up in December.
I'll be.
And I said, okay, deal. It was a Bethesda, Maryland draft board, so it was a very difficult for them to find people because everybody was deferred. It's a wealthy part of the world, and so there weren't that many kids they could draft.
And so they saw
They
you
were
as,
happy
hey,
to-
we're gonna get one
They were
here.
happy to get me. Yeah.
And where did you go to basic training?
I was in Fort Bragg, Fayetteville.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just give me an impression of what basic was for a young man that.
Well, it was interesting. Of course, it was, for me, I'd had a very sheltered life, pretty much, and hadn't been exposed to much, so it was meeting a bunch of type of people I didn't know, I'd never met before. And I enjoyed it. I always liked all the people I met in the Army. It was a good, I fit in fine, I think. It was, I made some pretty good friends there in basic, but even more in advanced training. I had made quite a few friends I was very close with when I was in advanced training.
And that was my next question.
Yeah.
You graduate from basic, and they get you in a huddle, and they start reading names out and MOSs and
Yeah.
what you're going to do. So nobody actually knew up to that point. You were just waiting to.
That's right. I just sort of figured I would probably be infantry, but
Well,
they
yeah.
wound up, I guess, because of my education, they put me in supply, or it was called armor school.
Oh, okay.
That's where I went. Was actually learned to be an armor. It was in a place called Fort Lee, Virginia.
Oh, Fort Lee. That's
Yeah.
okay.
And Fort Lee was nice. It was near Richmond.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a couple buddies, and we would go over to Richmond, and we met some girls there that we could go and visit, and so that was basically that advanced training was
Life
kind of
was
fun.
good then.
It was kind of pleasant. Yeah, it was
Sure.
pretty nice. Fort Lee was nice. It was odd because the way they were trying to get everybody through, as many as they could, and so there were shifts. So I had the night shift, so we would go to with school, regular school, classroom. We go over there like about 9 at night or something, and we get out about 5 or 6 in the morning.
Oh my God!
And go back and go to bed. So it was really odd. I'm not a night person normally. I mean, my schedule now is like I wake up at 5 or 5:30 every day and get going. That's just kind of the way my clock works.
Yeah, yeah.
But that there I became a night person, and it was okay. And I had nothing to do with weapons before. I knew nothing about it. And so it was interesting, and I learned to do all kinds of things, like put a 45 together blindfolded and stuff like that. I learned all that stuff. I knew how to do they taught us all the communist weapons. So that was mostly my training, was in small arms repair when I went over there. So I was good at that.
What rank were you when you graduated from that school?
Actually, they made me a Spec 4.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
got a Spec 4.
I was a 4 when I went over.
That was my question.
I was a 4 when I went over.
Okay,
Yeah.
and when did you get to Vietnam?
It was in just after Tet Offensive in March of '68.
Okay, and you probably, like most of us, remember landing, going to the reception station, I'm assuming, right? And then you didn't know you were going to be with the Wolfhounds at that point, did you?
Well, I didn't know until I landed.
That's what I'm saying.
I landed in Tonsonut,
Yep.
but I didn't go anywhere. I stayed in Tonsonut because that's where the Wolfhounds were at that time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They were in the perimeter because it was right after Tet.
Oh, that's
And-
interesting.
So
okay.
I actually joined the unit, but not in Coochie. I actually joined the unit there in Tonsonut, and it was pretty, because really that was the front line then.
Yes, it was.
And you could actually see communist troops over there across the field from us. It was really interesting. And after a bit, I can't remember exactly, but after a bit we did go to Coochie, and I settled into my little hooch and my little compound there.
Did
Yeah.
you hit the ground working at Tonsonut? Did they say, here's the
Yeah,
armory or
they
whatever?
did.
Or whatever?
They had me start doing stuff, but it didn't really get going until I got to Coochie. When I got to Coochie, I wasn't the supply sergeant right away. I was the clerk. There was a supply sergeant, a guy named Campbell. I remember him very well. He was probably the most traumatized person I've ever known. He was so. He was an emotional mess. He'd cried all the time.
Oh my!
And we would get mortared a lot, at night, pretty regularly. And then I didn't know much about it, so it didn't really bother me. I'd get up and get where we were supposed to go.
The bunker.
Yeah, get in the bunker. But he would just start lying on the floor crying and crawling, and he just was falling apart. And he eventually had to be sent home.
Oh my goodness!
He was so decompensated mentally that he couldn't function. But he did teach me how to do everything in supply. He was a smart guy.
Yeah.
And so then that was how I got to wind up being in charge, because he left. And they said, "Oh, you're going to take over now." I said, "Okay."
And
But you have to make me an E5. And
They did
if you
what?
want me to do that. I said, if you want me to do that, I need to be an E5.
Oh yeah, well of course.
And they said, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you never hear of a supply specialist.
Yeah.
It's always the supply sergeant.
They said, oh, okay. And then at some point a little later, I said, well, it would be a lot easier for me if I was a 6. And they said, okay. And it has to be a hard 6 because I won't get any respect otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
They said, okay. So that was how that happened. Yeah.
What's it mean what's a hard 6? Is there a soft 6?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
It's like a specialist.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so I wasn't a specialist. I had the regular stripes.
Staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant.
Yep.
Yep.
And when you took that job over, do you remember who the company commander was then?
No. I can't remember.
Do you remember anybody that was in, like the unit clerk? Remember Teach eventually became the company
Yeah,
clerk?
Yeah.
Do you
I remember
remember?
most of those people, and I remember Lee very well.
Mm-hmm. And then Gary Hunt,
Yeah.
okay, so.
Yeah, I remember him too. Yeah.
So, did you guys have a lot of contact with each other because of your job? I mean, did you have to go to the Quonset hut where the commander was and where the company clerk was? Did you have interaction with those guys much?
With what do you mean?
Like
With
the
my
company
supply
clerk?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So you had your own clerk.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because the company clerk that I'm thinking of is the one that would arrange for an R&R, or he would type up the.
I knew who that was, but I didn't.
You didn't have to deal with.
No,
Okay,
no.
tell me what a supply clerk. What's
Well,
going on?
mostly what the day to day with supply is figuring out what needs to go to the field every day and taking it out. So the clerk would help me. We would usually, I'd say about half the time we would drive to the field if we could. We had a deuce and a half, and we had a Jeep too with a trailer.
And by the way, you were one of the most welcome people at Crockett that we ever saw come out, because you always had what?
Beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Beer about halfway through my tour. Then, what was it, Westmoreland, when he left, right?
Yeah.
They kicked out Westmoreland, and that was when who was the new guy after
Williamson?
Yeah, I can't remember now. I'm not sure if that's right, but anyway, that guy didn't want beer anymore out of the field. But yeah, before that, I brought out a lot of beer. I would bring out a pallet, which is 90 cases, twice a week.
Wow.
I mean, people were drinking an average of like a case of beer a day apiece. I mean, it was like a lot of beer.
And you know, they told us when I got there, listen to this. Every guy either gets 2 beers or 2 sodas. And that was a ration. In
Yeah.
other words, that's what you got. And so when the beer got there, I have no idea if the mess tent controlled it. I don't know how that got distributed, but I always remember I would get my 2 beers and then trade, because there was guys that really liked to drink, and I didn't drink. I didn't drink any beer at all, and then I could really, that was good barter. You know, those beers turned out to be pretty good bartering material.
I was going to ask. It was rumored that you were very keen about negotiating weapons and different supplies you needed, and you found ways to use alcohol and other things to trade.
Yeah, that's
Was that? Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because there were a lot of things that you couldn't really get through regular channels. I could get ammunition, okay, for most of the weapons. There was some ammunition was a little hard. Most of the times I could get ammunition, but and stuff like uniforms and that kind of thing I could get pretty easily. But there's a lot of things you just couldn't get. So I had to barter with different people to get them. And what I did was we actually sold the soda and the beer. We sold it for 15 cents, and I would buy it at the PX, and it was 10 cents. So I made a nickel on every can that was sold, and I'd keep that money. It wasn't for me personally. I kept it and bought whiskey with it at the PX, and then I could use the whiskey to trade to people. And that was basically the way I did it. So certain things I had to give weapons to get. The hardest things to get with those strobes.
Oh,
To
yes.
call in and they were really important, but
Oh,
there
my
was no way we could get
Isn't
those.
that
There was
something?
no way to get them. So, but I went to Tonsanut, to the big air base there, and I went to the main supply guy there, and I told him my problem, and he said, "Well, yeah, but I need a 45 for it." And so I give him a 45, and then I could combat lost that later. And what that meant was, or I actually had weapons that I had combat lost. Every time somebody would get killed in a difficult situation, I would say they had their weapon with them, and we never saw it again.
Yes, of course.
And so that way I had, and of course I still had the weapon. So that way I had some weapons that were sort of like, you might say, untraceable.
And they were lost.
Yeah,
so,
they were gone, so I could give them away. And they wanted the communist weapons, but that was really hard for me to get, like an SK, was it called an SK6, I think? The one that you were allowed to take back because it was a single shot. Those I really couldn't get. I mean, I could have gotten anything. I could have owned Saigon.
AKs
AKs
come
were
through.
fun. AKs were easy. I had tons of AKs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had AKs all over the place. But
And didn't pilots and stuff really want to get their hands on some of that stuff?
yeah, they did. But that was very hard because those were so valuable. I couldn't really get those very easily.
Yeah.
But I could get a 45 really easily.
So-
And combat lost that, or I had M16s. I always had a lot of extra M16s because the guys would lose theirs.
Oh yeah.
They'd lose it. And they'd say, and we had to do it. We did an inventory every so often. I don't remember exactly, but every once in a while we do an inventory of all the weapons to make sure everybody had their weapon. And a lot of people just, they had no idea where it was.
Oh,
And
especially
they had
the one that
wrong
was.
or
Oh yeah, the
something
one
like
that was issued to you could have.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
here's an example. When I walked into the platoon, Joe Wascom had an M79.
Yeah.
And he was sitting on top of a bunker, and he saw me come in as a new guy, and he said, "Hey, come over here." And he goes, I want to make you a deal right here. Best deal you're ever going to get. I'm going to trade you this M79 for your M16. And he goes, you know what comes with this And he goes through this litany of all the different rounds.
Right.
I mean, parachute flares,
Right,
flechette.
smoke.
I mean, everything you could think of. And he says he forgot to tell me though about the 116 rounds in the rucksack.
Right.
He didn't mention that.
Yeah.
And he goes, and by the way, you get to wear a 45.
Yeah.
And he showed me the 45. And I think that was the deal breaker right there.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
yeah. So so there's my rifle. I had it for a day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and then later, they would tell us, if you lose your weapon, you're done.
Yeah.
I mean, they would really scare you. They'd
Right.
threaten you,
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, gosh, I lost mine the first day I was out.
Lots of people lost them.
You
We would
know.
always come up 5 or 6 short every time we did an inventory.
Yeah.
And another thing I did sometimes was we had one that we knew wasn't one of ours. It was from a different platoon or a different company.
Yeah.
What wasn't a company C, it was from one of the other companies. We'd wind up with one. So I knew this one was had nothing to do with us. So we'd take it in a bunker and blow it up with a grenade.
And say it was one of yours.
And then say, oh, geez, this one, but you can't see the serial number. I'm sorry. The serial number is blown up. Usually they would just say, oh. But after a while, it was like, you again? I don't think so. You're going to wind
Hey,
up in the brig. Buddy.
coincidence.
Yeah. But so that was another way of doing it. But those strobe lights, I wound up, that guy was pretty good to me. He would give me a few. Because
Well, I'm
somehow
glad you got one to Glover.
Yeah, somehow he could account for them and get them to me. And there were some other things that that. Another thing was mosquito repellent was extremely hard to get. You could get
See,
the stuff.
we didn't know that.
Yeah,
We had no clue about what was going on in the back.
yes, mosquito repellent was almost impossible because it was so valuable in the black market. But I could get that because I did a deal. I did some kind of a deal. I can't remember exactly how it worked, but I wound up with an entire Connex full of sheets, bed sheets that you
Oh.
slept in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I basically had all the sheets for the 25th Infantry Division.
Oh my gosh.
So if there was ever a VIP coming through, they had to come to me. And I would say, you give me some mosquito repellent, I'll give you the sheets. And so that was how I got the repellent. You could get this, I'm not sure what it was, this stuff that killed bugs in a spray can. You could get that.
DMT?
I don't know what it was. It
I
was
don't-
some nasty chemical.
I guess I never
And I'd
s-
often see the guy spraying that on themselves. Say, don't do that.
Yeah.
Here, I have mosquito repellent. Here's what you want. You
Yeah.
don't want to spray that insecticide on yourself because I don't know what it was. It was probably not safe though.
Probably not.
I don't think it was permethrin. I think it was some other chemical that was more dangerous.
Yeah.
And, so that was another thing. And I had little cases of this mosquito repellent. And I'll never have liked mosquitoes. So I always wanted to have that with me whenever
Yeah.
I'd go out to the field. So I'd sleep in the field, fairly often.
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2 nights a week I'd sleep out there. I don't know.
And so you'd mentioned earlier, when you got to Coochie, it was not uncommon for mortars to
We got
come in.
mortared a lot when I was first there. It didn't seem that kind of died off. I think they didn't want to be as obvious that they were there.
What I'm going to ask you is do you recall the first time it was much more than just a mortar and you really thought this could be real bad?
Well, as far as on Coochie,
Yeah.
it was only really one night like that.
Would you describe that for
Well,
us?
that was what it was Coochie. There's a book called The Tunnels of Coochie,
Yep.
which you could read, and it would tell you all this whole story in great detail. But basically, turns out that the 25th Infantry Base at Coochie was on top of the Cosman headquarters, which were underground underneath us.
Exactly.
They were actually literally underneath us, and they were just carrying on as usual and not paying much attention to us. But somehow they got it in their heads, well, it would be cool to just dig up and come up and go up and blow the place up. So they came up, and they came up pretty close to where my compound was, because there were lots of holes. In the morning after this all settled, I could see all the holes where they'd come up out of the ground. Were right there, right in front of where we were. And they came up and went over, and they blew up. It was a very successful operation from their point of view, because they didn't lose very many people. And they blew up a lot of helicopters. I mean, the big kind with the
Chinooks.
Chinooks, yeah. They blew up a bunch of those and a bunch of the little ones. And
Yeah,
it was
the
a very-
taxpayers took it in the rear end
they
that
had a
night.
very successful operation. What happened to me that night was at that point I had started sleeping in a little hooch that was away from everybody. I was just by myself in this little kind of bunker.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard stuff going off at night, but it wasn't that unusual to have explosions and mortars coming in and stuff. I didn't pay too much attention because I was in this bunker. I knew I was okay.
Sure.
But all of a sudden I heard this tap on the window. And I said, that doesn't sound good. So I took my mattress and put it over me, and it was actually a grenade. It blew up, and it blew up my hooch. And I was inside it. And I think that they must have thought I was dead, because I could hear them talking outside. The
Yeah.
communist troops, I
Yeah.
could hear them talking outside in Vietnamese, and they just kept going. And so I was lying there, and I wasn't hurt at all, except like deaf, but I wasn't hurt.
Sure.
And trying to decide what to do. And I had an AK with me. So I thought, well, maybe if I take this AK, then they'll be able to tell if I'm an American or a communist. And they won't,
Well,
know,
the-
they won't be
the
sure
sound-
whether to
the
shoot
sound.
me or not.
Yep.
I mean, just carrying it, I carried it very conspicuously. So I got up towards where my guys were. I said, hey, wait, it's Calvert, don't shoot me. And they looked at it, they said, okay.
Isn't that an AK?
Guess it is you. Okay, you can come. So that was that. And then what happened, the next thing that happened after a little bit, there were some guys and there was a group, a whole, a bunch of guys, 8 or 9 guys, in a deuce and a half going on the road that was down at the edge of our compound, and they got hit by an RPG. And I don't know if there was anybody killed, but there were some very badly wounded. And the truck was disabled, so they walked up to where we were. And I put them in my truck, put the guys in the back of my, I think it was maybe a 3/4 ton. I put them in the back and drove over to the hospital. I got to the hospital.
And stuff's still going all around. I mean,
yeah.
this is right in the middle of it.
Oh, yeah. And I got over there, and I knocked on the door, and they wouldn't answer. I said, hey, open up. I got some wounded Americans here. They wouldn't answer. And finally I said, really honest. Really, we are Americans. Open up the fucking door. And they did finally, and got the guys inside, and then I went back to my place. So that incident is actually described in that book, The Tunnels of Coochie.
Yep.
They didn't know who I was.
No, of course.
But they knew that that had happened.
Sure.
It's in there. It's kind of
How
interesting.
did you not die? You're in the ground, and the grenade was thrown in.
It was in the window.
And how did?
Well, there
how
was a
did you-
screen on the window, and it didn't quite get all the way inside, so it just was like the window.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And
Wow.
it's just, like I said, I had a mattress. It was a real bed, so I just sort of put the mattress over me, and there was shrapnel all around, but nothing hit me. I was fine. Just death. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you used to sleep out in the field with us.
Yeah.
What relationships did you build with us?
I think
out
I
in the
was
field?
close with a lot of people, but mostly I was just trying to look out for people. So typically, my typical day when I'd go out to the field, I'd walk around with a clipboard and a pencil, and I just walk around with people and ask what they needed.
What do you need?
What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? I write it down. So and so needs this and that.
Well,
this
I
and that
didn't
thing.
know your name was Calvert,
Yeah.
but Glover told me that, because ammo is tough to get sometimes. He says, there's going to be a guy come out here, and he's going to have a clipboard, and he's taking orders, basically.
Yeah.
And so whatever you do, if you're getting low, like on M79 stuff,
Yeah.
you get to him, and you tell him, because he's the only guy that we have that can get it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't have a clue who you were,
Yeah.
but you were the guy that was getting the M79 ammo
Yeah.
that nobody else could get.
Yeah, I could get about anything with the M60. You remember those? The
Oh,
little
God.
mortars, the little baby mortars.
Yes.
That was technically not a legal weapon to have. So that ammo was hard to get to.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the hardest thing. And I wasn't involved in this story, but before I got there, those mortars were actually supposedly, this story was told to me, I don't know if it's true or not, but supposedly they actually bought those M60 mortars on the docks in Saigon. They weren't actually, because you weren't really supposed to get them, but you could get them
Wow.
through some kind of black market
Sure.
arrangement in Saigon, like if you were a civilian,
Sure,
essentially,
sure.
you were buying them. And so supposedly that's where they came from. I don't know if that's really true or not, but I was told that that was where those M60 mortars, the little mortars,
Yep.
they were, I think that's the right term. Anyway, they were 60 millimeter.
No, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah,
That's
they're
exactly
60
what they
millimeter
were. Yep.
mortars, and rather than the other ones were 80s.
Yep,
The big
yep.
ones were 80s, and those rounds we could get easily. But the 60s were much harder to get. But I do remember we could get them.
Mm-hmm.
They came in little boxes.
So you have some relationships going, and you're busy back in the back. What was it like for you guys in the back when the word came in that one of the platoons was in real heavy contact and that they were going to be bringing KIAs in?
Oh, it was awful.
Do you remember that?
Of course. And I was, part of my job was also to go through everybody's stuff who was killed and send it home. And so I did that, and I found out who their family was and actually literally mailed it to them. I literally went to the post office and mailed it
Yeah.
to the families.
And then-
so I did that. That was one of the things I did. And I would occasionally be asked to identify too, but I didn't usually do that. Just every once in a while, if there was nobody else around, they would ask me to identify a body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
'Cause
that-
I knew everybody.
and
I
that-
don't remember them now. But
No,
I knew,
but I mean
at that
that
time
that
I
was
knew
like,
everybody.
and
Yeah.
that was like the worst.
It was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Did you did you have to type the letter?
To the family?
We regret to, did you?
No, that's somebody else who did that. But
That
I
was
don't
the
think
Army
I-
that did that.
I don't think I ever did that. I would sometimes write a letter to the family if I knew the person.
Mm-hmm.
And Wunderlich, was quite
Yeah.
a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And he and I did a lot of stuff together, and Mike. And so when he got killed, I wrote to his wife, to Janie, and she was she and Cy Creveling were the only people I kept in touch with after I left. There were a couple other people I wrote to once or twice, but I never kept up with them. But Janie, I kind of always knew where she was, so because Mike was quite a good friend.
Oh, and what a great guy.
He was a good guy.
I tell people this. I only went to one memorial service, and that was his.
Hmm.
And I said I don't ever want to go to another one of those.
You mean over there in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a lot of those.
Yeah, and I
didn't
just
like that much.
Oh man, I just said I
Yeah.
don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So you were, everybody just thinks you had to be out in the middle of a firefight to understand what was going on in the war, and that's really not true. You were in the hub. You were actually in the middle of.
I understand my perspective, but it wasn't the same as going out on patrol
Mhm.
or going out on combat or an ambush or something. I never did anything like that.
On February 23rd of '69, Diamond One got overrun.
Yeah.
My platoon was wiped out except 8 of us were left. And tell me what you remember about that that incident?
Well, I just went out the next morning. I think we had to take a helicopter in that case. Went out the next morning. It was very upsetting. I had the list, I remember, of everybody who was killed.
Mm-hmm.
It was very upsetting. Yeah.
And I've asked you
That was
this.
hard.
I've asked you this before, but I have a letter that you wrote to Gene Molberg, and so you and Gene must have.
I always liked Gene.
Okay, so you guys knew each other.
I always liked Gene. He's a good guy.
But-
yeah, still is a good
and
guy.
and I'm going to tell you this: your letter is probably the most accurate description of what happened in that perimeter that night.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how did that happen?
How did I know all that?
Yeah.
Because I talked to people a lot about it. And, you know, Glover, he was hurt that night.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. And then Glover was another person I was quite close with.
yeah,
And so that was very upsetting. Everybody thought he was dead,
yeah.
which was, that was an odd thing. He sort of came back to life.
Well, the deal
Yeah.
is he was the guy. I
Yeah.
mean, he's the one that taught all of us
Yeah.
how to survive Vietnam.
He's,
And he was actually.
he was a man. He was
Oh,
really a man. He
oh,
was,
man.
What a person. What an
Yep.
amazing man.
And of course, we thought he was indestructible,
Yeah.
and he was.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, people are saying he's dead.
Yeah.
We were like,
That's what I heard.
We couldn't
that he
believe
was
it.
dead. Yeah. I knew he was shot in the back of the head, so I thought this sort of was a story that maybe he was paralyzed, which turned out to be partly true.
Yep.
And but then everybody thought he was dead because somehow they lost touch with him. Nobody could figure out where he was
Yeah.
or what was going on with
Yep.
him, so we just assumed he was dead until you found him again.
Yep. And then
But he was the man. He was really quite an impressive person.
yep. And on that night, when I found guys that were in the perimeter that
Yeah.
night, there's a guy named John Kavanaugh. And the first thing he asked me after we were on the phone and
Yeah.
I found him, he said, "Whatever happened to Sergeant Glover?" And I said, "Well, I haven't found him yet."
Yeah.
You know, and I knew by then because Naso
Yeah.
and Galley, you know, they were calling me about every 3 days. Have
Mm.
you found Dick? Have you found Dick? Hey, I've only got so many fingers to dial
Yeah.
the phone with. But first thing he said to me is, Dick Glover saved my life that night because the satchel charge went in the bunker, it caved it in on him. And this guy, you know how the shooting ports were? And as the satchel charge came in, this guy was trying to crawl out. And of course, it went off and he didn't get out. So here's this guy's head hanging out this port. And Glover came by and saw him and literally got him and drug him out of that bunker, and it was on fire inside. So he would have burned to death. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no question about it. And I didn't know that.
That's an
But that's
interesting story.
another piece of that puzzle.
That's an interesting story.
You know,
Yeah.
and I thought to myself, doesn't surprise me at all. You know, Sergeant Glover saved us
Fearless.
so many times.
Well, fearless or very brave or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And did you take an R&R?
Yeah, I took 2 because I was there. You know, I extended 2 months so that I would have less than 5 months when I got back. If you were a draftee, the way the deal was, if you had less than 5 months when you went back, they let you go instead of making you do your 24.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I extended 2 months. So I was there 14 months, and so I got an extra R&R. So I had my first R&R. I went to Bangkok, and that was kind of it was a typical R&R. But when I got to Bangkok, it was Thanksgiving, and they asked if anybody wanted to have Thanksgiving dinner with an American family. So I raised my hand, said I'll do that, and this guy picked me up, took me to dinner. He was an embassy. I was a spook, I think, a CIA guy, and he took me to dinner with his family, and then he said, "Well, do you have a girl yet?" I said, "No, what's that? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I can get you a girl." So he took me to this bar and dropped me off. And said, "Talk to that guy; he'll get you a girl." So that was how that went. My R&R in Thailand.
How about the second one?
The second one was very different. I went to Hong Kong, and I really didn't want to do that thing with prostitutes. It wasn't really my thing. It didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
And so I just hung out, and I met some people from Australia who were there, just traveling around the world, hanging out, and I hung out with them for a week. That was real nice.
Yeah, and I went to Hong Kong,
Yeah.
and it's an amazing. If you haven't been there, it's very difficult for people to understand.
Yeah.
There's 1 million people living in Hong Kong vertically.
Yeah,
I mean, the
it's an amazing place.
I just
Yeah.
it's hard to describe.
Yeah, I'd like to go back there. I will. I haven't been back there since then. I've been to the Orient a couple times, but I've not been back to Hong Kong. I'd like
Yeah.
to go there. I know it's a lot different now.
Yeah. Did you get any awards while you were over there in Vietnam?
I did. I got a Bronze Star.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a night that I was out. It was one of the nights I was sleeping in the field at one of the bases. I don't remember the name of the base. But
Jackson, maybe?
I think Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of machine gun fire coming in coming in, you know, just like I was lying on the ground. It was going like
Sure,
over my nose
sure.
like that. And they heard somebody say that they needed help with the mortars. So I went over there, and what they did was I was standing by, it was an 80 millimeter mortar, and somebody had set it up, but they needed somebody to drop the actual
Oh,
rounds in.
sure.
So they
One
gave
guy's adjusting fire, and you're
Yeah.
dumping the.
So they gave me this thing, and the first one, I just picked it up and did it like this, and it went like boom by my nose like that. And they said, "No, don't do it that way." I was like, you know, and so then I learned that you drop it and you get out of it.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, but what happened was the next day, the first sergeant was talking to me, and he said, "Well, I can't remember. It was some lieutenant. I can't remember. I honestly, truly can't remember the names." Well, this lieutenant asked me to put him in for a Bronze Star because he said he dropped the mortar rounds in. And they said, "You were there. What is that? What really happened?" I said, "No, that lieutenant was in the bunker crying, and I was dropping the rounds in." He said, "Oh, well, okay, I'll put you in for it then." And that's how I wound up getting it because of
We
that.
just heard that a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Another veteran
No, that's a fact.
specifically said that some guy went up and told, I can't remember who, but he actually was there. He went up
And
to
he
his
was
commander,
telling the guy he did it.
and,
Yeah.
and the soldier heard it, and he went over and choked him and was going to kill him right in front of the commander.
Yeah.
He was choking him, and he said, "Let him go." They got him on a chopper, and they took him, and they never let
Never
him come
heard,
back.
never heard of that
We
guy again.
just heard that
Interesting.
story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
that's
so they
really
verified it with you. That's amazing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah,
It is.
yeah.
So when did you told me you stayed there 14 months.
Yeah,
You come home and you go back east, right?
Yeah.
Or okay.
San Francisco. Yeah.
What did you do?
When I got off in San Francisco, I had a friend from prep school. I went to a boys' boarding school in Connecticut, and I had a couple of friends that I knew from prep school who were living in San Francisco. And one of them was a guy named Peter Kaukonen, whose brother was Jorma Kaukonen from the Jefferson Airplane. So what I did was, I got out, and they said the next day, the airplane is going into Golden Gate Park. There's a bee-in, and you should come. So I rode into Golden Gate Park with the Jefferson Airplane in their car.
Oh, for heaven's
Grace Slick and all them
For heaven's
in their
sake.
car the day after I got discharged from the Army, and I was like looking around, saw all these naked girls walking around and everything. I was like,
Was that
whoa.
during the free love era?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, whoa, this is an interesting way to come back from Vietnam.
Were you in uniform?
Well, I'd left it.
No, he was done.
I know, but
Yeah, I left it at Peter's house. Yeah.
Did they
Yeah.
tell you when you rode the plane home? Did anybody tell you not to wear your uniform when you got to the States? Did they tell you?
No,
to change?
actually, I did wear it when I flew home. Yeah,
Yeah.
after that.
Did anybody give you any kind of negative?
No. I had nothing like that happen.
And what career then, after you got home, what career did you pursue?
Well, the first career I pursued was going on unemployment, which somebody told me I could file for unemployment. I said, "Oh yeah, I like that because I sure don't feel like doing anything." So I did that for, I think I got 6 months of that.
Okay.
And I was doing a lot of photography and hanging out. I was living in an apartment in Cambridge, same apartment I'd been in before I left, actually. And then I got a job working at the mental hospital, Mass Mental Health Center, as an orderly. Basically, I was kind of the heavy, you know, when somebody would get violent, they'd send me in to hold them down while the nurse came and gave them his Thorazine shots.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that kind of thing. So I kind of, when I was there, I figured out that maybe if you're going to be in the health business, you really don't want to be an orderly. You'd really be better off being a doctor. So decided to go to medical school after that.
And you went where to medical school?
Well, I went to George Washington, but I had to do my pre-med first, so I had to do 2 more years of college. Even though I'd graduated from Harvard, I didn't have any science, so I had to,
Oh, yeah.
Kind of go
Okay.
back for 2 years to do my pre-med chemistry and physics and all that, biology. I
And
did
so
that.
your when you became a doctor, your residency and everything was there back there, and
Well, I went to medical school in D.C. At George Washington University, and then I did my residency in Wisconsin, in Madison, University of Wisconsin.
what was that like? You see the stuff on TV, doctor programs all the time. Is it anything like what you see on TV?
Madison was pretty tame, but since, I ran a residency for 20 years. That was my main career.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that was more like that, the residency that I ran, which
Uh-huh.
is still in Klamath Falls. I still work there, and I still work there a little bit, just
Now,
part-time.
because I'm a civilian and I
Yeah.
don't understand the medical legalese, what is running a residency?
Well,
What does that mean?
I was the director. So what they decided in Oregon was that they wanted to have a rural residency to train rural physicians.
Oh, okay.
And they needed a director. And at that time, I had quite a bit of experience teaching, so I applied for the job and got accepted for that job. So I moved out. My wife and I moved out to Oregon to Klamath
So I was
Falls.
going to ask you when you got married. That was
Yeah,
my
the
next,
way that
my
worked
next
was,
question.
well, the first thing that happened after I got out of, so this is a little bit related. After I got out of, when I was in medical school, I accepted a scholarship from the government. It's called a Public Health Service Scholarship. So they paid for my tuition the last 2 years, and also I got a stipend. So I was married then to Betsy, and we had 2 kids. So that was really good because I had my GI Bill and I had that stipend. So we had enough money so Betsy never had to work while I was in medical school. When I got out, I owed them time because of the money they'd given me.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah.
they don't give you something
No.
for nothing.
So I finished my residency, and during the residency, I got divorced from Betsy, or just afterwards. Well, no, actually, Betsy came out. So anyway, my payback was on an Indian reservation in Idaho. So I was in the Indian Health Service.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so actually Betsy and I did move out to Idaho, so I had that wrong. And our marriage kind of fell apart a little bit after that. But I lived in Idaho in Pocatello, and I was the doctor on the Indian reservation. So that was a commissioned. So I was an officer then.
I'll-
So I started off as an 03,
I'll be-
which they call a lieutenant in the Navy. It's Navy ranks.
Yep.
And pretty soon I was an 04, which is lieutenant commander, and then in a bit I was an 05. So I wound up with another 6 years of good time
What
in the military time.
Jim, I've never heard this before. This
Yeah.
is interesting.
So I was commissioned. I wore a Navy uniform, though not an Army uniform. And so my father never did quite know what to make of that, seeing me in that uniform. And
And then you got married a second time.
I got married to Wendy.
Okay,
While
Wendy.
we were out in Pocatello.
Oh, Pocatello. Okay.
Yeah, in Idaho. She was married to a doctor there, a gastroenterologist. She was a social worker, and they got divorced. And Betsy and I got divorced. And Wendy and I started, actually Wendy's husband, the guy she got divorced from, he and I were friends. And we used to fish a lot together. And so I met Wendy that way. And then Wendy and I did a lot of fishing in Idaho together. And eventually we got married, and we're still married, and she's a doctor. But after a bit, she wanted to go to medical school, so we moved to D.C. And
Kind of went back to where you got
yeah,
started,
same-
kind of
same
the same
school,
path.
same
Yeah,
medical school.
Yeah,
Actually, just by coincidence, it was the same medical school. And then when she finished, did her residency there, and then this job came up in Klamath Falls to start the residency, and that's when I went out there.
Okay.
And,
yeah. And what about your 2 kids?
well, I have lots of kids, but Betsy and I had 2 kids.
I guess that's
Yeah.
what I guess
Yeah,
that's
those
what I
2
was. I'm
kids.
sorry.
Betsy and I
That's
had
what
2
I was
kids.
thinking of. Yeah.
Betsy and I had 2 kids, and they both produce grandchildren now, so we see them a lot. And Wendy's very important to them, the woman I'm married to now. She's a
Yes.
very important person in their life. Because Betsy's quite frail and not doing well now, so Wendy's pretty important to them. And then Wendy and I had 2 kids. And then in between my marriage, I had a lover named Jan, who was another one of the residents when I was a resident. She had a kid named Mike, who lives in L.A. And Mike just had a baby. Mike and his, so that's 5. I have 5 grandchildren now, so that's pretty cool.
Is that why you told me once when I asked you how much doctors made, you said I was dead broke most of the time?
To begin with, I was, yeah, yeah. Because really, when I was in the Indian Health Service, I didn't make that much money.
Yeah.
And Betsy was really, really expensive. She went through money like it just like that, you know.
Yep.
So I don't even know where it went. She just got. So I had a lot of debt, but once we got Wendy through medical school, since then financially we've been good.
Yeah.
'Cause we were both doctors, both bringing in good
Sure,
money.
sure.
So she's actually still working. So.
Yep. And did you stay in touch with anybody that you served with in Nam after you came home?
Just Cy Creveling and
you you said that earlier. And,
yeah,
Ja-
and
and
Janie.
Janie. Yeah.
That's it.
I got to ask you this about Cy. Was he as funny in Vietnam as he is now?
Yeah, he was very funny.
He is. You know what? He's just a crack up.
He is. He's a riot. He's a good person. He's a really good guy. I
Yeah.
really like him.
And I got to tell you, from our perspective, when he walked into our platoon, Glover
Yeah.
was running the whole
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
He was platoon leader and platoon
Yeah.
sergeant all at once.
Yeah.
And we were at Crockett, and I'll never forget. He comes in and he's got a camera. Cy does. And he's taking pictures of. I mean, he's
Yeah.
walking around like a news guy almost, you know. And he was very curious. And he'd sit down with us, and this is an officer, right?
Yeah.
And we're going, wait a minute, officers don't do this.
Yeah.
You know, and he has so many pictures of us at Crockett
Yeah.
that I never knew existed.
Oh yeah. He's
And-
a
and-
good person.
Oh my gosh!
He's just a really good person.
and
yeah.
and for whatever reason, I know he's really smart for one, but for whatever reason, when he came to the platoon, he told everybody, I don't want to be the guy telling everybody what to do because I don't want to get anybody killed. So Glover's still we're gonna co-run
That's funny.
run
Never
this
heard
thing.
that.
Oh yeah. So, and everybody would have almost rejected him anyway because
Yeah.
Glover was God to us. But yeah, and so instantly everybody liked him. I mean, he said something really smart there.
Yeah.
And God,
He's a very smart guy.
and I just, you know what? Of all the memories of Vietnam, I remember some of the most horrible days of our life was with Cy Creveling. And now, at the reunion, he can reconstitute those events and make them sound funny. I mean, at the time, they were the most horrible night of your life, you know, but somehow he can, you know, like I say, he's just got that ability. And I just think, you know, I really liked him in Vietnam, and I just love him now.
He's a really good person.
He's just really great.
Yeah.
So, anything else in happened in Vietnam that I haven't brought up or that is important that we need to include here?
No, I think I explained what my daily life was like. You know, getting stuff together, scrounging stuff, and
Well, I got
trying
a
to make
question.
sure of everybody.
I
make
got a
sure everybody
question.
was okay. It was the first job I ever had. You know,
Like
I
a
had
real-
the job
like a
in
real-
Hollywood,
but a real job like that, yeah.
But it was the first when I had responsibility to take care of other people, and I took it very seriously. It
Yeah.
was very important to me.
One
to
thing
look
that
out
always
for everybody.
baffled me, because we were always scared out in the field anyway,
Yeah.
we would hear that you would go to Saigon in a Jeep and back. Weren't you like scared to death that you were going to get, how did you do that and never get shot or?
Well, that was tricky, but it was often more tricky driving out to where the fire bases were. Yeah, because that would be pretty intense.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
So riding the Saigon was just like going for a Sunday drive, basically?
yeah. Well, and we'd always generally get to have lunch in the Continental Hotel too while we were down there, so that was good. The main reason I was going there was just to do some trading
Yeah.
on the air base at Tonson.
And so how did you make relationships? I mean, when you were first doing it, how did you find these guys? How
Well,
did,
I just went. I found out where the base was, and I asked where the supply was, and I just kept.
oh,
talking
so
to
you
people.
just,
I just kept talking to people until I found the right guy.
I gotcha.
I knew he was a little bit bent, and he would be okay. Yeah,
Oh.
but he was really a good guy. He understood that he needed help. That I needed his help, and but he didn't want to just give me the stuff. He wanted to get something for it, so which I thought was reasonable.
How
Yeah.
could you communicate them through communications channels when you were in Coochie?
No, it was all just person to person,
No, I mean there was
not on
no.
the phone or anything.
That-
Is that what
that-
you're asking? No,
yeah.
no, it would just be
Okay.
personal. Yeah,
So
I don't remember ever using a phone or anything like that there. You know.
okay. And what would you say your definition of a hero is?
Well, I think it's somebody who puts other people's welfare above their own on a consistent basis.
Would you say your dad was a hero?
Oh, he was very brave. Yeah.
So brave.
He and I didn't necessarily get along very well, but he was a very, very.
But
brave
bravery
man.
has something to do with it?
He was extremely brave and a very dedicated person.
Mhm,
Yeah.
And so, what do you think, besides a soldier being a hero? Do you think doctors are heroes?
Sometimes I think that the person who has my job now running the residency is a hero. It's a woman who I think she's just one of the smartest, most wonderful people I've ever known.
Wow.
And
That's awesome.
now my boss and my wife's boss too, since
Oh,
she
okay.
took over
Yeah,
from
yeah.
me. Yeah.
And finally, I'd like to know, what would your advice be for today's generation and the generations that follow them and follow them? What would your advice be to them
Regarding what? In general?
in general?
Well, I do know a lot of young people because I do a lot of work with teenagers. And what I try and encourage them to do is to not sell themselves short and to like follow their dream if it makes sense. I mean, sometimes
Yes.
people give me a dream that's just
Sure.
crazy, and I don't encourage that. But
Sure.
if I see somebody who wants to do something and I think they could, then I tell them to go ahead. Because a lot of people tell a kid, particularly a working class kid in Klamath Falls, that told me you could never do that.
Oh,
They'll say,
wow.
yeah, I hear that a lot. Kids get told, well, you could never do that. And I say, well,
And unfortunately,
if
they
that's
believe
what-
it.
if
Yeah.
that's what you want, you can do that. Yeah. You have to want it pretty bad, but
Yeah.
yeah, you could do that. And so I think that's the most important thing, the advice that I have for young people. I do this thing with Rotary Youth Exchange, where I have about 25 kids who leave the U.S. and go overseas for a year in high school, and we have about 25 who come back. So that's a big part of what I do actually
Oh.
every day now, is take care of all that. So I have a lot of contact
Boy,
with
that's
teenagers.
a program there.
It's
yeah.
a big deal. It's almost like a job. You know?
Yes.
And so I'm looking out for those kids all the time.
So would you say you're a retired doctor?
Yeah, I am, but I still do a little bit of doctoring, but not much.
You got your license is always current.
I have right now that, yes. And the only real patient care I do now is with abused children. I work in
I was just going to get to that because
Yeah.
you've shared that with me
I
before.
work in a child abuse unit where, well, the kids, when there's a new kid who comes up who's just been abused, then they need to have a medical evaluation, so
Sure.
I do that. You know. So I see those kids, but it's just a one time. They
So you-
come in and we.
So there's no follow up. You
No, I
don't follow with
No,
them.
I just do a one time
Okay.
evaluation, figure out what's going on with them.
And I'm assuming you've seen some very horrible.
Yeah, I see some pretty scary stuff. Yep, pretty bad stuff. Yeah. Some really bad stuff, actually.
Well, because I know you, I can just imagine that those kids that come to you are pretty lucky because of your compassion and your temperament and your personality. Man, you'd be the guy that could just literally just put your arms around them and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We're going to get through this type of thing.
Yeah.
And to me, you're a hero.
Oh, thank you.
And I mean that sincerely. I really mean it. Not only because of what you did in Vietnam, because you know what? If it wasn't for you, I'm not sure we would have done as well as we did. And that's a fact. And you've been told that by many, many people before. And but more than that, I think when I found out that you were a doctor, I mean, when I first found you, I thought, why would he ever become a I'm just going,
Yeah.
what in the world? And now I know your story.
Yeah.
And but you were in it to win it. You have stayed with this. So, well, Jim, is there anything else? Because I'm just so honored to be able to sit down and talk to you
No,
like
it's
this.
great.
And
I think I feel good about what we've said.
and
Yeah.
you've always been a tremendous supporter of the Wolfhound mission and what we've tried to do and for the vets and so forth. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. So, my
Yeah.
friend,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.